So in today's demonstration, we're going to wrap up the things that we need to explore for Unit 3, working with Shape Tweens and Classic Tweens. And so in today's demonstration, we're going to be working with this file called Coffee Cup with Steam. And you can find it in Blackboard in the course contents section, the Unit 3 supplemental files folder. And there's the link for the zipped file. So you'll just click on that, and it might not be a zipped file, I can't remember. But anyway, it'll download what you need, and when you open it up, it should look like this when you open your document in Animate. So you'll have 3 layers in the layers panel. You'll have a coffee cup layer, so I can turn its visibility off and on so you can see that that lives there. Then we have the window layer, so that's just for the window. And then we have the sky layer, which we don't have anything going on there. There's just a brown background. So the goal that we're shooting for in today's demonstration is animating a shape tween and a classic tween to create this animated scene where we have a coffee cup with steam rising above it, and as it gets higher up in the air, it kind of expands, it gets a little more billowy, and then it just dissipates. So we're going to be animating several properties of that element, and we're going to create that visual element in Photoshop. So we're actually going to be using Photoshop in today's demonstration as well. And we're going to use Photoshop to create an asset that we're going to bring over into our Animate file and then animate it. And we're also going to use a shape tween to animate a gradient. And that's going to create this sunrise effect through the window. So I'll just play this example video and you can see what it is we're shooting for. And our steam should be a little bit more noticeable. Mine's kind of faint. So just very simple animation. So I'll pop back over here. So I think the first thing that we'll animate is the steam over the coffee cup. So to do that, we need to create the asset for the steam in Photoshop. And the reason why we're going to use Photoshop for this asset creation is because Photoshop allows us to create certain kinds of details that we just really can't achieve in Adobe Animate. You know, we've explored the drawing tools in Adobe Animate. We've explored the drawing modes and all the different things that you can create. We're using the tools and features in Animate. And it does an okay job, but we also know that it's kind of limited. It's no Photoshop or Illustrator. So when you need, a specific kind of look or more sophisticated graphics, then oftentimes you'll have to create those in another program and prepare those in another program to bring them into Animate. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to hop over here to Photoshop, and we're just going to create a brand new file. And it's going to be a very small file. So let's create it to be, I don't know, maybe 3 inches by 3 inches. And let's give this, if we can assign it a black background, we'll do that. So I'm going to create a custom, and I'm working in inches, so do make sure that your measurements are set to inches. Let's do it 5 inches by 5 inches. So it's just going to be a square document. We don't need anything really huge. And let's also prepare this at 300 resolution. And this needs to be in RGB because we're going to be using this in an animation. So it will always be viewed on some sort of a monitor, whether it's a computer monitor or a television screen. But anytime you're creating something that's going to be viewed on a device, an electronic device, you need to create that in the RGB color mode. And then once you get these specifications set up in the new document window, then just click Create. And there we go. One thing I forgot to do was change the background color. I'm going to do this one more time. Even though I'm probably just creating more steps for myself by doing this. But 5 inches by 5 inches, 300 DPI, and the background color is going to be black. And there we go. Now the reason why we want a black background or a dark background, doesn't have to be black, it could be brown or navy blue, but it needs to be something really dark. Because what we're going to be creating is going to be transparent for the most part. There will be some blending of different variations of opacities to create this cloudy steam effect. And in order to really be able to see what we're doing and what we're creating, we need a dark background to create this in front of. We also want to make sure that we create this element on a separate layer. So do not create it on the background layer, because if you do that, then when we bring this asset over into Animate, you'll just have this beautiful plume of steam that you created in Photoshop, and it will be it will exist within a black background that you won't be able to get rid of in Animate. So our goal is to bring this element over as a transparent, with a transparent background. So we're just bringing over the steam element, and that way we'll still be able to see through it when we animate it in Adobe Animate. So let's create a brand new layer, and you'll do that by making sure your layers window is open, go to the drop down menu, and just choose new layer. And we'll go ahead and call this steam. And then this is the layer you want to make sure that you have selected when you start to create your steam effect. So now we're going to do some drawing, and we're going to use the paintbrush tool to do this part. And we're going to adjust periodically properties like the opacity and the brush size and the brush hardness as well. So choose just the regular paintbrush. So make sure you're not picking any of these other tools. There's other brushes that have a paintbrush icon, but you just want the plain old brush tool. And then once you select that tool, when you look up here in the top of the window in Photoshop, you'll see the control bar at the top. And this is where we'll be able to adjust our opacities and our brush size and hardness. So I'm going to first check my brush size and the hardness of the brush. And when I talk about the hardness, I mean like when you create the brush stroke, does the edge have a crisp edge, or does it have a feathery, soft edge? And we want something that has zero hardness. We really don't want any hard edges in our steam. We just want it all to look very cloud-like. So make sure that your hardness is set to 0. And to check out your brush size, it's a good idea to kind of just carry your cursor over to the to rest in front of the black background or dark background so that you can see the size of your brush. And I know that I need a brush that's quite a bit bigger than this. So I'll go back over here to brush sizes, and I will just scrub that slider over and make that brush bigger. So I think I'll start out with something like this. So mine is set to 153 pixels. The opacity is set to 12%. And I think that's probably okay for starting out. And this is how we're going to create our steam. We're just going to start clicking and dragging and drawing some white pixels. Oh, wait a minute. I totally goofed. I forgot to set the color. I talked a lot about the paintbrush, but I didn't explain the color of the steam. So let's go over here to our foreground color picker box. And just click on that and choose white. And now we're ready to create our steam. We'll also use some other tools to help kind of create this steam effect. And one is going to be called the smudge tool. So notice that I'm just, in some places, I'm beginning my brush stroke by overlapping over previous strokes, and that gives me this variation of opacities and transparencies. And now I think I want to kind of push these pixels around and blend some of these areas a little more, create some little streaks or ribbons inside of that steam, just like you would see steam look in real life. So I'm going to go to my edit toolbar and find my smudge tool. Oh wait, my smudge tool was already in my tool window. So the smudge tool looks like a hand with the pointer finger or the index finger poking out, and that's the tool that you're going to use. It also uses brush sizes and hardnesses, so it uses, you know, the brush appearance properties as well. And it also uses strength properties. So I'm just going to kind of swipe through these steamy areas and start pushing some of these pixels around to create little wispy edges that kind of stick out. And also just, you know, use this tool to push the pixels around to create the overall shape of your steam. So right now I'm using the smudge tool. And notice that as I use the smudge tool and I'm just clicking and dragging through these pixels, I'm always clicking and dragging in an upward direction. So that's kind of important too if you want to create something that looks more like, you know, more like steam, because it is just moving in an upward motion, you know, as steam does in real life. So you want to create your steam in Photoshop to look the same way or mimic that same kind of direction and movement. How's everybody doing with their steam so far? All right, good. The smudge tool. So you just place the cursor where you want to start that smudge process, and then once you have your cursor placed in that location, you want to click on the mouse button and hold it down and then swipe in an upward direction, and it will push those pixels. Kind of like, you know, when you're working with pastels or graphite in real life using traditional drawing tools and medium, you would use a smudge stump, a blending stump, or even your finger to push those bits of pigment around. It's really what this tool is doing, you know, digitally for you in Photoshop. Oh, where is the tool? Oh, okay. So it looks like this. Do you see it right there? It looks like a little hand with a finger pointing out. If you don't see that, then it might be under this button for editing the toolbar, where it stores all the rest of the tools that they just don't have room for over here in the tool window. If you click that option, Edit Toolbar, this window will open up, and just scroll through here and look for that smudge tool. it's located with the blur, sharpen tools. It's grouped into that little set. And then when you choose that tool and you want to add it to your toolbox, then just like if I click the smudge tool, mine's already out there. I'll add the blur tool. Hold on, I'm trying to show you how to add it to your toolbox, but I think I did something weird. No, it's the smudge tool. My smudge tool is already showing. So I was going to, I guess these are already, I'm trying to find a tool that I don't have out here. I was going to show you how to add it to your tool window. So let's say I want to add the dodge tool. It's not showing it over here. Hang on. It should show up in this extra tool window, and then it gives you an option to select it or add it.
Sometimes I'll have to just click and drag it over.
Yeah, I've done that a lot too. So you could just click and drag it over. Let's see, what's another one I can add? It's just not behaving for me right now. Either I'm overlooking something or I'm clicking on things that are already out here. Have you found yours? You did? Yes. So to use it, set up the brush size for the smudge tool that you want to work with. And then once you have that set up, and the brush appearance, so make sure it has soft edges, and then place your cursor where you want to start that smudging process, and just click and drag with the mouse in an upward direction, and you'll see it push the pixels around. So I'm going to change brush sizes and go down to something really small and add some, go smaller than that, I think. And I actually think I want more of an artistic brush too. Instead of, right now it's just creating these kind of mechanical looking, same thickness strokes. I want something that kind of tapers at the end. So let me see how to add that. So if you open the brush window, you can explore these different brush tips. So like under wet media brushes, it has all of these different appearances for your brush stroke. Some of these might work really well. I don't know, I'm going to experiment with some of them. So I'm drawing new pixels in with this artistic brush. I'm going to try a different one. Oh, that was really, really dark. I think maybe this hard round might be my best bet. I'm trying to avoid making mine look like a tree, but we'll see. Okay. So I had to pause this video for a second because I realized that when I made a series of undos earlier, I undid the step where I created the separate layer for my steam. So I had to very quickly create a new file and create some new steam. So when you're watching this video, you might notice that suddenly my image changed in a snap, and that's why, because I paused the video to get myself where I need to be to move on to the next step. So just a few more little smudges here and there, and I think I'm pretty close to having my steam look the way I want it. Okay. And I think I will finish this off just by kind of making it a lot larger so it fills this window more. And I can live with that. So this is going to be my steam effect right here. And so now I want to save this file, but I want to save it a certain kind of way so I can bring it in against a transparent background. And so the way we're going to save this is do a file, save as, and instead of saving this as a Photoshop file, which you actually could use just a Photoshop file as well. I think it would just let you pick exactly what layer you want to bring in. But I also know that saving it as a TIFF file will allow you to save it as a transparency. And that will also work in an Animate file. So I'm going to save this on my computer. Let's save it. How about save it two ways? Do a file save as and save it as a TIFF, and then do a file save as and save it as a Photoshop. So you'll have two versions of it. One is a TIFF file, one is a Photoshop file, and then we can experiment with either one and bringing those in. That way you can have that experience of kind of comparing, you know, the ease of adding one of these assets in a certain file format. I'm going to show you. I'm getting ready to do that right now. I'm just trying to find the location of where I'm going to save this, and then I will save the file. So I found the folder that I want to save this in. I want to save it, you know, with all the things for this unit. And so I'm going to save it as a Photoshop file first. Now it will automatically by default want to save as a Photoshop file. So once you find the location where you want to save that, then just save it as a Photoshop. So we'll save it and hit OK. And now I'm going to save it one more time. So I'll go back to File, Save As. And this time, and it'll automatically go to the previous location, but this time where it says Format, Photoshop, right here, I'm going to change this to a TIFF. And so just choose that option. It'll change the extension as a TIFF file. Hit Save. And it's this window right here where, I thought it was this window right here. At some point it does ask you about save transparency. That's what I want to check right there, but maybe it automatically does it. Interesting. You can see down here that's an option, but I cannot get that to be accessible. Okay, I'm just going to hit OK, and fingers crossed it will save it as a transparency. So it says including layers will increase file size. That's fine. Don't let it flatten it, and hit OK. All right, so now let's bring our asset over into Animate. So I'm going to go over here to Animate, just click on that icon, and I'll hop right over into my Animate file. And I'm going to go to File, Import, to Library. And then I'm just going to go find that Steam that I saved. So I saved it in my Unit 3 folder for this class. And it's not letting me choose that. All right, hang on a second. I've done something. I've overlooked something. Maybe the reason why is because all the layers are locked. So I'm going to create a new layer right now and call it Steam. Let's just see. And you want it to be at the top of your stack because it needs to be in front of everything else. So I'm just going to pick it up and drag it to the top. All right, so, and make sure it's not locked, and make sure it is visible. And now let's see if we can import. And you can either import it to the stage or the library, either way. Huh. Very interesting. I'm going to pause this for a second and we're going to figure this out. Okay, so one thing that I just noticed when I was trying to re-import this, when I went to File, Import, you can choose to Stage or Library, either one. If you choose to Stage, make sure that you have your Steam layer selected. But this was odd. I don't know how this got switched, and apparently I wasn't the only person having this difficulty because another student experienced this as well. But where it says Enable at the bottom, mine says OGG Vorbis. I have no idea what that is. None whatsoever. But I clicked, I assumed that this had something to do with why these are all grayed out. So I clicked this drop-down menu and I just chose all files. And once I did that, it made these files selectable. So I have no idea what that was or why it was set that way. So if you were having the same problem, try it on your end and make sure that it is set to all files. So I'm going to start with the Photoshop file and see how that imports. Aha, so you can do a Photoshop file and it opens a special window that allows you to select all the layers that you want to import. I don't want the background layer, so I'm going to turn that off, and I'm just going to leave the Steam layer checked and then hit Import. And there's my Steam. And it imports it. When you import it to the library, it goes ahead and imports it as a graphic symbol, or at least on my end, that's what it did. If you import it to the stage, I don't know that it'll import it as a symbol, but you'll have to convert it to a symbol in order to apply the Classic Tween to it, which is no big deal. It's just one extra small step. So, but there's my Steam, and I'm going to pause this for a second, make sure everybody else was able to make that transition okay, and then we'll all move on to the next step. Okay, so we are ready to move on to the next step, and so let's go ahead and turn on the coffee cup layer. Turn the visibility. So when you turn the visibility of the coffee cup layer on, you should see the coffee cup sitting there in the bay window. Does everybody see that? Okay, cool. Now make sure your steam layer is selected, and then you're just going to go over here to the library and grab the steam layer by the icon and drag it over. Now it's going to be huge, okay? So just want to warn you, it's going to be ginormous, but that's all right. We're just going to scale it down. So in order for me to scale this down, I need to zoom out so I can get a hold of these scaling handles. And I'm going to use the free transform tool for a lot of this manipulating of this shape. So right now I just want to hold shift and scale down. And that allows me to scale the object down to a smaller size while keeping the proportions the same. And with this same tool, I can move my object. So I can scale it, move it, rotate it. I can even distort it by not scaling it by holding the shift key, so not doing a controlled scale, but kind of freehanding it. You can stretch it out or distort it in that way. But I want to position my steam just sitting right over the coffee cup. And then I'm going to animate the steam moving up to the top of the window frame. So this is going to be done using a Classic Tween. And the reason why we're using a Classic Tween is because we need to move the object from one spot to another. So that needs to happen. So a Classic Tween lets you move an object. We need to do some transforming of its appearance. So we need to scale it up, because as steam rises, it also expands. And then we're also going to animate its opacity in different places. So as it rises, it expands, and as it dissipates, it begins to disappear and becomes completely transparent. And so a Classic Tween works well for that. And these kind of, first of all, we can't use a Shape Tween with this kind of object. So we have to do it with a Classic Tween. And since it's such a simple movement, just moving up into the air in a straight trajectory, we don't need anything more sophisticated like a motion path, which is what we're going to dive into in the next unit. So before we start the animation process here, let's give ourselves some space in the timeline to animate within. So let's come out here to, let's say, frame 120. And I'm just going to click on the frame right at 120 in the top layer, the steam layer. I'm going to hold the shift key down, and I'm just going to, sorry, I did something wrong. I'm going to click on the frame on the bottom layer, but in that same column, so that the entire column of frames are selected. And then I'm just going to hit F5. So we're not going to add a keyframe. We are just extending the visibility. That's all we're doing at the moment for all of the layers. So F5 will do that for you. It will just extend the visibility without adding a keyframe at the end. If you do an F6 and you add a keyframe, well, that keyframe at the end of the timeline can influence how you're able to animate in the frames before. And it, like I tried to describe it previously in another lesson, it kind of acts like a magnet. So if you've moved, an object to do something, whatever that object was set at that keyframe when it got created, it's always going to be kind of working against you. So that's why we don't want a keyframe at the end of this timeline yet. All right, so now we're going to add a Classic Tween to the steam layer. So just anywhere in these frames, it does not matter where, but just right click or hold the control key down and click, and you will get the special editing menu for the timeline, and you're going to choose Classic Tween. So now we see this shade of purple that fills in all of those frames of visibility, and we see a dotted line. So that means that we just have an incomplete tween, just because we haven't animated anything yet. But that's going to change once we start to create keyframes. So I'm going to move my playhead out, maybe to like frame 40. And create a keyframe right there. And let's say that by frame 40, I'm going to use my free transform tool to select the keyframe right there and move this steam up from the cup a little bit, about halfway through. And then I'm going to do some adjustments. So I'm going to start to scale it. And right now I'm kind of freehand scaling it. And so I'm not holding the shift key down. I actually wanted to kind of stretch it, make it a little bit wider. So now we have this kind of tween going on where it starts as a small plume that fits just right over the coffee cup. And then as the playhead moves through, you see the steam moving and expanding, okay? And I might even see if I can adjust it to elongate a little bit more. I don't want it to completely detach away from the cup just yet. So to do that, I just grabbed the scaling handle at the bottom and just stretched the bottom of it down. You can also control how you scale an object by moving this a transition point, you could call it that, or a translation point or a rotation point. But this can reset, where or how it scales. And since I did that after the fact, notice how it popped my steam down. So let me undo that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and undo this to the point where I take out that first keyframe that I created, and I'm going to make sure that I set that transformation point at the beginning. That way I don't have that kind of blip. So I'm going to go back to my first keyframe. I just took out everything that I just did, that one little bit of animation, because I want to set this down here. So now I've moved that transformation point, and now I'm going to come out here to about frame 40 again and hit F6 to create a keyframe. And then I'm going to make the steam bigger and wider. So we got this kind of thing going on. And now I'm going to move my playhead maybe to frame 80 and hit F6. And I'm going to pick up the steam and move it to a new position. Ooh, that got kind of crazy.
So you do it all in one keyframe?
All on this one keyframe, I'm making these transitions. And then I'm going to open my properties window and go to color effects, go to alpha, and reduce the alpha. And then in this last keyframe, at the very end that I'm going to create, F6. I'm going to stretch this out and then turn the alpha all the way down. So now let's see what we have. I'll bring the playhead to the beginning and then just start to scrub through. And you could also, if you wanted to, you could duplicate this steam layer and have 2 copies of it, and then just kind of slide the keyframes at different times so that you have another plume of steam starting as the next one, rises up. to a higher level. If I select this layer, I should be able to hit Command D. Maybe it doesn't, well, it just duplicated on that layer. All right, so hang on.
We don't have to do that if we don't want to.
You do not have to do that. No, I'm just experimenting. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. Nope, I just duplicated my steam. Well, you could just create a new steam layer. And then just introduce that steam effect again to the library, or from the library. I'm just experimenting at the moment. And so I don't want this steam necessarily to be visible at the same time, though it doesn't look too bad. So I might move its visibility out to like maybe frame 20. And then have this animated in a similar way. So I'll add another Classic Tween. And maybe right about here, this begins to, oh, one thing I didn't do is set the translation point. I just want to do that. And then right about here, another keyframe. And now I'm ready to move this guy up or scale it up. I'm trying to make it look like it kind of blends in with the steam that's already above it. And another keyframe. Oops, scaled it the wrong way. So anyway, I could continue to work with that and get it to look better, but you get the basic idea. How did that work for everybody else? Okay? All right, good. All right, so let's animate the sunrise. I'm going to lock these two steam layers. And let's unlock the sky layer. In fact, I might turn the window off. And so what we're going to do for this, to create that, the appearance of the sun rising, is we're just going to animate a gradient. So if I turn these layers off, what we have is a shape that's been created to cover the stage. And then I just applied a gradient to it. And I set up the colors for the gradient. So those are already preset. And then as as it looks like the sun is rising, all we're doing is using the gradient tool to move the position of the lightest part of that gradient into the center of that window. And so as all these different colors move through, it gives the appearance of the sun rising. So let's pop back over here and make sure all your layers are locked except for the sky layer, and then we're just going to create a shape on the sky layer. And it just needs to fit over the stage. Yep, just a shape. So just get this rectangle tool. And we want to make sure that it is a shape. So when you select it, it should say shape in the properties window. If it doesn't, then you just make sure that you modify it so that it's broken apart to become recognized as a shape. And that's how we'll be able to apply Shape Tween to that layer's timeline. So now I'd like to fill this with a gradient. So with that object selected, I'm going to go over here to the Fill section. In the Properties window, if you choose the Object tab, that will give you access to a Color and Style window. And we're going to go to the Fill Color. And a swatch window will open up. It's very sensitive, as you can see. It even samples this gray color of the interface. So be very mindful of where you're hovering with this tool. But I'm just going to use one of these, get started quick gradients. So I'm going to choose this blue gradient, and it's a radial gradient. So you want to choose a radial gradient. And then I'm going to open a window that will allow me to adjust the gradient colors. So I think in Animate we just go to Color. There we go. And so there is the color window, and it again gives you the options to reset the color either to solid or linear gradient or radial, but we want radial for sure. I like this deep blue color, so I'm going to keep that. But I am going to add some more colors. So I'm just going to slide the blue, the cobalt blue, kind of in the middle. And then I'm going to, and this is under the gradient slider down here in this color window. I'm going to click on the light end of the spectrum just to create an extra color block. And with that selected, that's where we're going to add in the new colors that we want to add. So I don't want anything that's quite that yellow, but maybe a real pale version of that. And we'll just kind of see what that does for us. And we need this shape selected to apply that to it. So make sure and select it through the keyframe. That's probably the best way to do it. And then slide your mid-tone over in the color or in the gradient slider, and then choose or create a new color stop block. And that's where you're going to add in the new color. And let's see, I think kind of like that. It's kind of it's a cross between an orange and a yellow. It's got a lot of white in it too, and so I think that will work pretty well. Now, if we'd created this as an object, drawn object, it actually would have been easier to see the adjustments that we're making with our gradient. But let's just try it. I mean, I drew mine as a merge drawn object. I just wasn't even thinking about it. You can apply a gradient to either kind of object. It's just when it comes to editing, it might be easier to see the changes that you're making on an object drawn object, because as you can see with a merge drawn object, you get that screen that shows up every time you select your content. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to go find that gradient tool. I think it's behind here. There we go. Ah, beautiful. So once you use the gradient tool, you can see your artwork without it being distorted with a screen if you created yours using merge drawing mode. So with this, I'm going to make some other adjustments to my gradient, just now that I can see it clearly. Oops. And I'm just what I'm shooting for is trying to ease the harshness of this banding a little bit. So I'm trying to smooth things out color wise. And that just takes a little bit of finessing. So this blue might be a little too bright. Let me see if I can just kind of tone that down a little. So I just selected this color stop block. So if you want to edit any of these colors, the best thing to do is click on the color block and then just sample inside of this window. And you can see now that as I find these various midtones of this blue, it helps it blend these colors together a little bit better. So I think I can live with that for right now. And I'm going to just move my gradient down. So now I'm ready to position it. So I had it centered over my stage just so I could edit the colors and make sure I have them looking the way I want them to look. And now I'm ready to position it where it's going to be at the beginning of the animation. So to do that, you can pick up the whole gradient by grabbing this gradient grabber, that's what I'll call it, and just pick it up and move it. These other handles do different things, like this will scale the whole gradient as a whole and keep the proportions constrained. And that's something that you can also capture in your animation. So if you want a more intense kind of sunrise, you could start with a gradient that's really low. And then as we begin to animate using the Shape Tween, we can scale that gradient up and move the whole gradient higher, or change its position. So I think I'm going to start it right here. And now I'd like to see the window in this. So that way I can really gauge how far down this needs to be. So there's my night sky, early morning sky. And now I'm ready to apply the Shape Tween to my sky layer. So I have everything set up the way I want it at frame 1. And now I'm ready to apply my Shape Tween. And this is just going to be done between 2 keyframes. So at the first keyframe, it's going to look like this. And then I'm going to drag my playhead, or just come all the way down here to the last frame, add a keyframe by hitting F6. And now we're going to set the position of our gradient. So I will grab the gradient. I'm using the gradient tool to select the gradient. And I'm just going to move it up higher, like this. And then I'm going to scale it. Now I'm going to use this scaling handle, the circular one. I can use this one, but it stretches it. It lets you scale it and distort it at the same time. I don't want to do that. I just want the whole thing to expand out nice and even, just like that. So we get a nice sunrise. Maybe even position the sun a little bit higher. And now let's see what we have. Sure. All right, so that is, I think we've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover for this unit. So let's take a look at the assignment instructions. So next week will be a work week. There is an assignment file in here that you can use. It's called Jack-O-Lantern Moon. So this is the one that you'll download and animate. Of course, you can create your own scene. That's totally fine. I'm going to open up the animated version of this so you can see how it's animated. So y'all, this is really scary, okay? So just gonna, I'm just kidding. But it is festive. You have to admit. Halloween's just right around the corner. Now my sound's not working. What is going on? There's supposed to be the sounds of bubbles in the background. And the sound of doom. So this is just an animated example of a goal you could shoot for. You can animate this scene however you want. Okay, it's entirely up to you. This is just my own creation, just to show you as a sample. So the assignment is says it would take a few minutes to examine the file so you know what you're working with. Notice that the layers have already been created and labeled. So when you open your document, you should see that this scene is already set up for you with layers as well as symbols in the library. So your job will be to animate the scene using the methods mentioned above. So up here, here's just a little outline of the objectives that we covered in this unit. So you will also add sound to your work by using the sound loops in GarageBand. I don't know that we all have access to GarageBand anymore. I have, but that's actually where I found some of these snippets. Or you can bring in sound from other sources. So there's some great resources online for finding free sound effects. So you can add to it however you'd like. You may also take creative license and create your own graphics and add them to the scene, or just create your own scene entirely. But this is a criteria that you'll be graded on down here. So you'll be graded on the following criteria. Animate 2 objects using the Classic Tween method. Animate 1 object using the Shape Tween method. Animate an object's transformation. And animate an object's color or opacity. And then add sound to your work. So all of these things need to be included. Let that be your checklist for all the things you need to check off for this assignment. Then when you're finished, just submit your Flash file. It's actually, you would think that it would have an extension that sounds something like Animate, but it's actually an FLA file and it's a Flash file, and that's because Adobe Animate used to be a program that was owned by a company called Macromedia, and back then it was called Flash. They are the exact same programs. It's just that it's owned by Adobe, but for some reason they've never changed the file extension. So it's always been FLA, but that's what you'll send to me. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's demonstration, and I hope you enjoy working on this assignment. And so next week is a work week, and we will work on animating our Halloween scene. And I might even show up with some Halloween candy. So definitely come to class and work in class next week.